everyone. Welcome to part 4 of our CLM series. In this video, we're going to be answering the question, what work does a company need to do at its end before choosing a tool? If you've watched videos 2 and 3, you will see that we've asked you to map out the process of the contract lifecycle within your company. So the first exercise would be to map that process out along with the timelines built in for each of those processes. Extremely, extremely important for you to know what is the turnaround time for each contract, what is the expectation within the company, and sometimes you have different turnaround times for different processes within the contract. So you need to map that out so that you get a broad sense of what that entire system looks like. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at that CLM process sheet that I had put together. Now, once you are looking at this process, let's say you've identified that you need a software tool to help you create the first draft of any contract. The first thing that you would need in place is to get your precedents or your templates in order. So you need to identify which of the contracts do you consistently work on all the time that are in a standard form. It could be an NDA receiving, an NDA mutual, an NDA providing or disclosing. It could be a shareholders agreement. It could be a master services agreement, any agreement. Identify which are your high volume set of agreements, which are taking a lot of time in creating the first draft, and create your precedents for this. And sometimes it's not just the agreements, you may want to create your precedent clauses as well. So if you are a seller of services, you may have an indemnity clause that works for you when you are the seller of services. When you are a buyer of services, you may have a different indemnity clause. So create the precedents for all of your high volume documentation and clauses. If you are looking at third-party paper and you are reviewing your counterparty's agreement, then I would say you need to first work on identifying what are your internal company principles, because you are reviewing this third-party paper against your own policies and procedures, and it is important to understand. So for instance, you may need to know what is the cap on liability that you have for different types of agreements. Maybe on service agreements, it's one type of liability cap. And with other types of agreements, it may be a different type of liability cap. It could also be that your perspective as a company changes depending on what type of counterparty you are. In the counterparties where you are a buyer of services, you may want a higher indemnity. So your internal principle is for indemnity may be asking for a larger amount. Whereas where you are a seller of services, your internal principle for providing indemnity may be for a much smaller amount, and you'd always want to cap it. And maybe you want to cap it in context of the consideration of the contract. Either way, you need to first put in place what are your specific internal principles depending on the perspective of counterparty that you are. Another example is if you're looking to record all of the internal approvals, you need to have that internal approval matrix in place. So for XYZ type of contracts, I need approvals from credit and finance. And it needs to be X designation of finance, X designation of credit. For ABC types of agreements, I need the operations and business teams to sign off and the designations of the people you need the sign-offs from. So you need to very clearly have that internal approval matrix already in place before you look at any software that can help you with the internal approval process. If you're looking at the obligation management, you need to know for each type of contract, which are the different stakeholders within the company that which are the different stakeholders within the company need to be informed or involved in the obligation management of that contract. So you need to already have all of this information in place, and you need to have it for different types of contracts. And if it's a custom contract, you need to have certain thresholds built in. So for instance, if it's a contract of where the consideration is more than 100,000 USD, then it needs approval from ABC, or it needs management from ABC. So you need to have all of that matrix for obligation management as well very clearly defined, because then when you actually get a system, it's easy for you to just sort of plug and play that information into the system that you've chosen. If I'm looking at storage, then I need to have a method of organizing all of my storage of data related to the contract. So it's not just the contract, because I will need to know where have I stored all the different versions of the contract, but it's also where have I stored all of the internal approvals of the contract? Where have I stored the people who are in charge of obligation management for the contract? where have I stored the executed versions of the contract? I need to answer what is the method of storage that I want to have in place for the entire contract lifecycle management process. That needs to be very clearly laid out even before you look at a repository tool, because you need to know what are the types of folders you want, what are the types of subfolders you want within each of that subfolder, and who is going to have access to each of these different folders. You need to have answers to all of these questions, and in some places you need to have the actual information ready. So if it's a precedent, you need to have that precedent ready. If it's the approval matrix, you need to have that ready. You need to have the answers to all of these questions ready before you even approach a vendor. That concludes our response to what are the things a company needs to do internally before choosing a tool. I think it's extremely important to focus on what are the things the company needs to do, because often users come to a CLM vendor thinking that the software will just be like magic and solve all of their problems. And often that's not the case. I like to give the example with KitchenAid. You may have bought the best KitchenAid appliance out there for mixing your dough, but if you put bad or spoilt milk into that dough, it doesn't matter how good the KitchenAid equipment is, because your dough is still going to be spoilt because you put in spoilt milk. So it's really important that before you get the fanciest system or even the most basic system, any system, before you get any system in place, it's really important that you have all of the ingredients that are required to go into the system all ready and lined up. Because if you don't have that in place, it's going to be a huge mess rolling out that CLM system. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.